Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and so here we are on the last day of 2019, which began with us scenting Brexit battle in our nostrils and ended up with, that battle being at the last minute well and truly lost. So I feel a little bit like Napoleon at Waterloo. Had it won and then it lost. But what I'm going to do in this video is to go through the key events that happened month by month in 2019 so that we can then get ready to look ahead to, well, what must be done in 2020 and beyond. But first, if you'd like to see more of my videos, then please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, back in January, it seems like a long time ago, the withdrawal agreement had been finalised even further ago, months before the previous summer, but this was the first time that Parliament was going to have a vote on it. We knew it was going to lose, and that's because Parliament was supposed to have a vote on it in the previous December. Theresa May pulled that vote knowing it was going to get hammered to try and shore up some support, which was not forthcoming. The scale of the loss was truly historic. She was setting herself up to be the Prime Minister that lost votes by the biggest margin. And if anyone thought that this historic defeat was going to force Theresa May to work with MPs in cross-party cooperation to get a withdrawal agreement that people could get on board with, they were to be sadly disappointed. February is when Donald Tusk made his famous quip about the circle of hell for Brexiteers, and the UK government was still thinking, or being led to think, that a no-deal Brexit card was something to be played as a winning hand. All it actually did was cause EU countries to go, oh, you're thinking about a no-deal Brexit, are you? Right, we'll just carry on with our no-deal preparations. Oh, we notice you're not making any no-deal preparations. Could that be because you're not really going to go for a no-deal Brexit? I mean, that's the thing as well. Even if you believe that threatening a no-deal Brexit could actually work, you have to back it up with action. We weren't preparing for it. And the preparations since have been piss poor as well. But if it wasn't obvious before, it should have been obvious at this point that all threatening a no-deal Brexit was ever going to do to the EU was to cause them to increase preparations for it, not weaken themselves in order to avoid it. The thing is, the thing that Leave supporters simply didn't seem to understand, or many of them anyway, is that although a no-deal Brexit is the worst outcome for the UK, it's not the worst outcome for the EU. That's not to say you can ignore it, oh, it's fine. It's not fine for the EU. But it is by far not the worst thing that can happen. Donald Trump published his proposals, or rather demands, for a US-UK trade deal. It involved forcing our public institutions, such as the NHS, to buy American products over those produced anywhere else. It also involved lowering our standards to the point where we would have to accept whatever products America wanted to export to us. But in the opposite direction, rules would still remain in place barring UK products from imports to the US. So we'd be spending more money on American products coming to us. That's what we spend money on. That's not good for us. And making less money from American customers by exporting, because we wouldn't be able to export more. And in fact, we'd have to be importing more. So that sounds like a good deal, doesn't it? In March, that was where it all blew up, because that was the original date for leaving the EU. But without an agreement, Parliament forced Theresa May to trot along to the EU and seek an extension. It was a short one, with the intention being that she said, oh, I've amended the withdrawal agreement a bit to try and get Parliament to vote on that amended deal. You also had a huge protest in London, in excess of 1 million people marching for a people's vote. Just give us a vote with Remain as an option. You think this withdrawal agreement's great? Right. Well, we'll decide, shall we? Ultimately, of course, that went nowhere, but thanks very much to everyone who went, and then later in the year as well. April, Parliament again rejected May's deal for the third time now. It was basically the same deal. It was by a narrower margin because a load of Brexiteers were starting to fear that Brexit would be cancelled altogether. They thought, oh, either that or they knew it would still be defeated and decided it wasn't worth being seen to vote against Brexit. Because that's what the likes of Boris Johnson and Jacob Rees-Mogg were doing. They were voting against Brexit. I mean, for all the talk about, opposition parties, maybe they should have voted for it, which I'll come to in a moment. The bottom line is this deal would have gone through if Conservative MPs had voted for it. You know, Theresa May kept saying to Labour, "Oh, it's your fault. You should have voted for Brexit." It's like no one ever stood back to her and said, "No, why don't you tell your MPs to vote for it?" But yeah, some will ponder. I know some people have pondered. Given what has happened now, shouldn't Parliament have voted for it because it's a softer Brexit than what we've got now? No, it wasn't. It wasn't. Yes, Boris Johnson has worded it so it is now worse, but nothing that is in Boris Johnson's amended version of the withdrawal agreement, which is basically the same, was prevented with Theresa May's version. They were still going to change it. The reason being that the people who eventually forced Theresa May out of office wanted this no-deal Brexit, and they were going to get it. They were going to get it. And nothing in May's withdrawal agreement would have stopped the worst forms of it. In fact, ironically, it's better that it turned out that way, because had it not, she would have gone anyway, and Boris Johnson still would have come in to be Prime Minister, only he would have gotten away without the stain of being the one to take us out of the EU. Theresa May would have done that. And then he would have been the Prime Minister to clear up the mess. But no, now he gets to be the Prime Minister who still caused the mess. Eventually anyway, when people actually see that. When the next deadline came and went, because that came and went in April, May had to again traipse off to the EU to get a longer extension, this time for Halloween, October the 31st, and with a warning not to waste the time this time. May was the month that should have told the Labour Party exactly what they should be doing. Corbyn was refusing to back another referendum with Remain as an option. The polls were saying that had he done so, the public would have backed Labour. Labour would have absolutely beasted the European elections. As it was, they did not. And those same polls that said Labour would have beasted it if they'd have adopted a people's vote, which is all it was. It wasn't saying they had to adopt a Remain position. That would have been better. Just a vote with Remain as an option. That would have done. And those same polls that predicted that accurately predicted the actual results, which were devastating for both the Conservatives and Labour, much as the local elections had been. Labour tentatively later moved towards that position, but the damage was done. And although that policy would have secured them the European elections, it was not enough for a general election, And a general election was now being thought about seriously as Theresa May's position became completely untenable, and out she was going. In June, with the UK government in complete chaos, as the Conservatives fumbled about for a new leader, various major economies around the world were taking it in turns to explain how the UK had no chance of getting a better deal than being in the EU, because apart from anything else, they had deals with the EU. And the EU is a bigger partner. And we weren't going to get any deals at all until we'd agreed a post-Brexit deal with the EU. And that's still the reality facing us. If we go out at the end of 2020 without a deal with the EU, we can kiss goodbye to... Other countries won't even talk to us. They have already said, no, you do deal with the EU first, then we'll talk. And that will be the reality then. In other words, a no deal is going to see us returning empty-handed from negotiations, with the exception, of course, of Donald Trump's United States. July, and Boris Johnson became the first favourite in modern times, as far as I can tell, to actually win the Conservative leadership contest. Parliament then promptly shut down, giving him completely free rein to be an utter dick, further dragging the name of the United Kingdom through the mud on the international stage. But with Johnson's takeover of the party, he moved it massively to the right wing, fearing the Brexit Party's influence. And sure enough, it worked. The Brexit Party started slipping back in the polls as Brexit-supporting voters returned to the Tories. Actually, thinking about it, that sort of sends the message that changing the leader and the direction of a party has an impact on the electorate. I wonder if there's another political party that potentially should learn that lesson. Anyway, August, with no Parliament in session, Boris Johnson went around the world showing us up, including a non-attendance at a planned press conference where the Prime Minister of Luxembourg had no option but to take the piss out of our so-called leader, basically chickening out because he didn't want to answer questions to journalists. As the month wore on and Parliament was getting set to return and give Johnson a very hard time, our unwanted Prime Minister set into motion his plan to prorogue Parliament, that is to shut it down for basically a month. In fact, it's going to be 5 weeks. September was the month, therefore, when the British judiciary came out in force in all its glory. Boris Johnson's prorogation was deemed unlawful after a lengthy battle, though it still gained him time and an escape from select committee scrutiny for nearly 3 weeks. And this was the point at which Parliament fought back against Boris Johnson and won. Despite there being a much easier route to victory had Corbyn just backed a compromise candidate to lead a government of national unity. But Johnson at this point was finished. He had no majority, no real power, completely impotent. The opposition had him completely tied up, boxed in the corner, to do with as they wished. And I did a video on this, and it is one of my most viewed, and right now makes me look like a right tit, given what's happened since. But that is simply because the opposition gave Johnson the power he asked for in a bizarre turn of events that will baffle political historians for centuries to come. October. If September was the month of the judges, then October was for the politicians again. The third Brexit deadline was looming. All the talk was whether Boris Johnson would follow through on his threats not to seek an extension, but that would land him in prison. Nigel Farage even started wailing at the prospect of not getting an extension. He was scared crapless of a no-deal Brexit looming and demanded that we must have an extension in a very bizarre turn of events, something that cost him a bit of support from his Brexiteer fanboys. Naturally, Boris Johnson did back down. As I say, there were very real consequences for ignoring the law. But in a final play, he modified May's withdrawal agreement, got it past the first reading in the House of Commons. So Brexit was going to happen. The withdrawal agreement was going through Parliament. But Parliament wanted a few modifications of its own. And so Johnson pulled his own bill and pressed for a general election yet again. And then insanity reigned. In an act of madness, for reasons that I've guessed at, but I cannot really know for certain because I've not really seen a credible explanation, the SNP and the Lib Dems agreed to support Boris Johnson's bid for a December general election. Labour got behind it reluctantly rather than look like they were running scared from an election. I have since found out from my local defeated Labour MP, however, that this need not have happened. At the time, I was just blaming the Lib Dems and the SNP. Labour, as far as I was concerned, were largely blameless. But on the day, especially after the amendments were not going to succeed, the numbers were there to stop it. They'd sort of changed their minds. All Jeremy Corbyn had to do was then whip his MPs to vote against it, and it would have been defeated. By all account, the fact that he did not do so, the whips were absolutely fuming. But, you know, the bottom line is Johnson got his majority and so the general election was triggered. So then November was all about gearing up for the consequences of that mistake. The mistake that, going back to like September time, Dominic Cummings was promising his staff, don't worry, because at this point they were finished. He said, don't worry, the opposition will make a mistake. I was laughing at him. Bloody hell, he was right. Up until this point, the Remain side were winning. 2019 was a hard-fought battle, but it was turning out as well as could be expected. Definitely with Brexiteers in charge of both of the main political parties. But then defeat from the jaws of victory due to madness from the very MPs who suffered from those catastrophic blunders. This was not about self-serving MPs. They hurt themselves. Even the SNP, whom you might argue gained, because they won more seats, suffered. They may have more MPs now, but they have less power in Parliament. They had a great deal more power when they had fewer MPs because of the hung Parliament. But anyway, the campaign got underway. It started badly on the part of the Conservatives. Of course, Johnson had packed his cabinet with idiots, but the party quickly moved to silence their more cretinous ministers, such as Jacob Rees-Mogg. The difference it makes when your campaign strategists know what they're doing and, more importantly, actually face up to the fact of how their statements and actions affect the electorate and don't just live in their own silly little bubble. Debates and interviews were largely dodged by Boris Johnson, who had nothing to say other than get Brexit done. And the polls were predicting a Conservative win, but by taking a lot of seats by a small margin. And therein lay the hope. We needed to persuade lots of people to turn out and vote. Small numbers would determine the outcome. Then December came along, and so it proved. We saw the consequences of having a leader of the opposition who was reviled in the country. A leader that the small number of people who will decide who is going to be the champion opposition against Boris Johnson next saw nothing wrong with and still even defend. So that gives us hope. So Brexit is now certain. Here we are at the end of the year. Brexit is now certain. A hard Brexit, 95% certain, whereas for most of the year, it looked very unlikely. And with no chance of Parliament lifting a finger to stop it under any circumstances now in 2020. So that's where 2019 has left us. I will pick up tomorrow on where we go from here. So I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, then also please click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.